Welcome to The Explainer. You know, the economy can feel like this giant, impossibly complicated machine. So today, we're going to pop the hood and really see how it works, from the huge forces that impact your day-to-day life, all the way down to the nitty-gritty decisions a single company makes. So here's the plan. We'll start by taking the economy's temperature with inflation. Then, we'll dive into the competitive arenas where prices are actually born and peek inside a company's playbook. From there, we'll see what happens when the whole system glitches, and finally, look at the government's toolkit for fixing it.
All right, let's jump right in with something we all feel in our wallets: inflation. You can almost think of it as the economy running a fever.
At its core, inflation is pretty simple. It just means your money doesn't stretch as far as it used to. Prices for everything are going up, and that means your purchasing power is going down. So, what's behind it? Well, one of the biggest drivers is when there's more money flowing through the system. Now, on the one hand, that can be a good thing. It can spark more production. But it also leads to that classic economic problem of too much money chasing too few goods, and that inevitably pushes prices up.
Okay, but where do those rising prices actually get decided? To figure that out, we need to zoom in a bit into the marketplaces, the arenas where businesses go head-to-head.
You can think of markets as a spectrum. On one end, you've got perfect competition. Tons of companies all selling basically the same thing. And on the complete opposite end, you have a monopoly, where it's just one company calling all the shots. And this is where a monopolist has all the power. I mean, they're not just another player in the game, they are the game. This means they get to look at the entire market demand and pick the one price that makes them the absolute most profit, even if that means selling less stuff overall. All right, let's zoom in one level deeper. We're going from the marketplace, right inside a single company, to understand the cost calculations that drive every single one of their decisions. You know, every business, big or small, has a basic playbook. And it's all about balancing two different kinds of costs. You've got your fixed costs, think rent, that you have to pay no matter what. And then you have your variable costs, like raw materials, that go up the more stuff you make. So let's look at how this plays out with some actual numbers. See that column, total fixed cost? It's locked in at $60. It doesn't matter if they make nothing or if they make 6 units, that cost isn't going anywhere. That's their overhead. And when you plot this on a graph, it just clicks, right? You can see it clear as day. The firm's total cost is really just its variable cost, but with that fixed cost added on top, giving it a higher starting point. But to make really smart business decisions, you have to think on a smaller scale. Firms are obsessed with per-unit costs. So what's the average cost for each thing they make? And maybe most importantly, what's the marginal cost? What does it cost to produce just one more item? And that leads us to this classic U-shaped curve. This is so important because it shows the sweet spot for a company. Right there, at the very bottom of that U, that's where the firm is at its absolute most efficient. The average cost per item is as low as it can possibly get. That's the magic number they're all chasing.
So we've seen how firms try to make these rational decisions. But here's the big question. Does this system, with everyone acting in their own self-interest, always work out for the best for everybody? Well, not always.
This is what economists call market failure. It's that tricky situation where every individual is doing what makes sense for them, like a factory saving money by dumping waste, but the end result is that the whole group, the whole community, ends up worse off.
And market failures can pop up for all sorts of reasons. It could be a monopoly that jacks up prices, or those externalities we just talked about, like pollution, where the cost gets pushed onto society instead of the company that created it. So when the system does have these glitches, or when things get out of balance, and this brings us right back to big problems like inflation, governments have a toolkit they can reach for to step in and try to steer things. One of the biggest tools in that kit is monetary policy. Think of it like this. The central bank raises interest rates. That makes it more expensive for commercial banks to borrow money. They, in turn, make it more expensive for you and for businesses to borrow. This slows down spending across the board and helps cool off an overheating inflationary economy. And the other major tool is fiscal policy. This is all about the government's own budget. We're talking about adjusting how much it spends and how much it taxes to either speed up or slow down the economy.
And that really brings us full circle, doesn't it? The huge macro problem of inflation is directly tied to the tiny micro-level decisions of individual companies. And when the market's famous invisible hand starts to fumble, that's when government policy is supposed to step in and act as a counterbalance.
Which leaves us with this massive, fundamental question. How do we get that balance right? Figuring out when to let the markets do their thing and when to step in, well, that's pretty much the great ongoing challenge of all of modern economics.